There's kind of one other aspect that I think that we haven't addressed and a lot of us never think about, and that's some of our issues in the uplands and how that affects our lakes. And I've asked Carla Fromm, who is from the EPA, out of the Boise office, to address a little of that for us.
I want to thank the Cottles for inviting me to join you today. And I like to take these opportunities to come and meet the folks that have such a beautiful place to live and discuss their issues with them and take the opportunity to tell them about some of our programs that might be sort of on the periphery of their minds. You've got a lot of issues that you're focused on over this weekend, and these are kind of sideline issues. So I appreciate being able to say something about them. I can figure out how to use this. This one, oh, okay, got it. I wanted to talk a little bit about the stormwater program that we have at our agency. And we have a website, and I can flash that up later. But what is stormwater, and why do we worry about controlling it? So this is related to construction sites, primarily, in terms of what you want to look for when you build your house or your subdivision or your new roads. If you do plan on putting roads down to the lake, what would you need to consider? So everybody pretty much knows what we're talking about when we think of stormwater. It's the runoff that comes off the hills, comes off the roads, and enters wetlands or streams and makes them muddy. Why do we regulate them? It's one of the things that we haven't regulated very well in the past. We dealt with other point sources first, the waste treatment plants, the oil refineries, other kind of industries. We gave them limits at the end of their pipes where they discharged into rivers. It was to prevent things like the Cuyahoga River when it caught on fire in the 70s, if you might remember that, or the late 60s. So that's one of the reasons we have the Clean Water Act, was to put controls on those kind of point sources. And stormwater is considered a point source. You might think of it as a non-point source. It is somewhat ubiquitous. It's hard to, it's not often put in a pipe, but we do consider it a stormwater point source, and therefore we regulate it. We don't very well regulate non-point sources. The type of contaminants are your sediment, primarily. Trash is another one, and metals, oil and grease, solvents, nutrients that Amber talked about this morning. And I mentioned the Clean Water Act. This is part of the discharge elimination system permit program, the MPDES, or some people pronounce it NIPDES program. And it regulates construction, industrial, and municipal stormwater. But today, as I mentioned, I'll just talk about the construction general permit. The goal, again, is to eliminate stormwater pollution from construction activities. Do you need a permit when you're going to build a site? Well, if the runoff would discharge to a waters of the U.S., yes, you would, or if it goes into a storm sewer system. There are places in Idaho that are somewhat contained, very high and dry, and people take their chances. They don't apply for a permit. They assume that in the heat of the summer they're not going to have a storm event and run off. And that's certainly someone's prerogative. They can take a chance and hope they don't get a rain event. But if they did have a rain event and pollution found its way to a stream or lake, and EPA was close by with inspectors, we could ding them for not having a permit. So that's that potential to discharge that people may want to consider when they decide whether to get a permit or not. And there is an acreage. We had started with regulating sites, construction sites that were 5 acres or more. Now that's come down to 1 acre. And the project, if it's part of a common plan of development, it still requires a permit. So you might have bought a lot from a developer, and they had put in the streets and sewer and had their own construction stormwater permit during that time. You come along and buy the lot and build on that, and you have a separate builder even, that builder should be applying for a permit, even if it's a site that's smaller than an acre. Because it's part of this larger development, because the pollution going into the stream or potentially going into the stream would be for more than an acre, that's why we regulate that. And I don't know why my animation was working kind of funny. But, and then the project, is it eligible for a permit? Most projects, if they're an acre or more, we will automatically give you a permit when you request it. Often endangered species are an issue, and those will take a little more time to deal with. If you have an endangered species in the stream that you'd be polluting, you need to consult with the National Marine Fisheries Service or the Fish and Wildlife Service, depending on who regulates that species. Who's required to get a permit? The operator. So sometimes the homeowner takes on the responsibility as operator, but probably a good idea would be to pass that on to your builder. They should have the knowledge and the know-how, the experience with applying for a permit. They should be willing to do it for you, and they should know how to do it, and it shouldn't be a big deal. We have in the past had experience where the builders don't understand it. An inspector shows up on the site, and there's some confusion about who should have gotten the permit. And sometimes we can sue both the owner and the builder if there's confusion, and we kind of let them worry about who's responsible and try to sort that out through the lawsuit process, I guess you'd call it, the penalty process. But it's really the person who has day-to-day responsibility of the site. So what's required in the permit? It basically requires you to develop a stormwater pollution prevention plan, a SWIP. And there are templates on our website. You can print those out, make your own from that template. We've tried to make it easy for people. There's examples of SWIPs on a CD that we have available too. Examples that pertain to the larger subdivisions, some for the smaller subdivisions or your small lot on a larger site. So some of the things that we're trying to get people to think about when they're trying to reduce sediment coming off their property. Disturb as little area as possible. We have some developers that it's a 20-acre site and they hire one earth mover and he or she comes in and denudes, strips the vegetation off the entire site, and then the site sits through a winter. Well, come spring, snow melt happens, there's a ton of runoff from that site. It's unprotected. So why not start in smaller increments, develop just the lots that you think you're going to sell that year or you know you've sold, strip those down, do your development of those. So phase your construction. Control the runoff coming onto your site, and so that it doesn't come across your site and carry sediments through the bare ground that you've disturbed. Stabilize the soils promptly. We ask that they be stabilized, I think it's within 10 or 14 days from when there's been a disturbance. So you need to get the grass seed on fast, you need to get the straw mulch on quickly, and that's going to do a huge amount of sediment reduction. Protecting slopes. So here's an example of a bare slope. It's got to be stabilized. And then just some examples quickly of some ways to protect your storm drains so that they don't carry away sediments. And the silt fences, you'll probably see those around. Some of you might have used those on your own property. They have to be buried to be effective. Sometimes people just stake them in and stormwater will get under them. The wind will pull them up and they're no longer effective. Here's examples of some sediment traps. Basically building a pond on your property at the lowest end to catch the sediment. And those should not be put in streams themselves. You cannot build a sediment retention system in the stream. Applying for a permit is easy. You do it directly on the computer. You need to do it prior to construction, and some people find that an inspector shows up and they forgot to apply for a permit, or they realize after they've started construction that they forgot to do it. Later is certainly better than never. So get your paperwork in just as soon as you can. And then it's an automatic permit issuance, so it's not like with a lot of our waste treatment plants or other industries, it takes us forever to get through the process. We've really made this streamlined, and it speeds things up so that it doesn't hold up your construction project. Just some examples of types of problems that we see out there when we do inspections. Large and steep sites are really the worst, the biggest problem. Erodible soils. Again, phasing the grading activities, stabilizing disturbed areas. They're all pretty obvious things. Here's an example of a graded area. Example of some sediment-laden water that got away from the person working the site. They didn't understand how to control sediment and put a straw bale out there that was not effective. Another example of a silt fence that's being that's overtopped, basically. So enough sediment came off that hillside that it went right over the silt fence. And these things have to be maintained. You can't just apply for a permit, develop your SWIP, and walk away. You need to be maintaining your best management practices. And in fact, inspect them periodically. You set up your own inspection program. Here's an example of a sediment basin put in a stream itself, and that's a no-no. We find those just are not effective, plus you're ruining the stream you put it into. Example of a temporary sediment pile that is unstable. It's actually in the street. Rain's going to fall on that and wash sediment particles into your stream or lake. Example of erosion on a hillside. We see people driving through construction sites and driving away down the street and carrying that mud into the street. And we get lots of calls from the people that have their homes built and their lawns manicured now. They complain about the muddy street. And that's kind of a good test. If you see sediment going into the stream from your site, you've failed the test. You need to get back in there and modify your BMPs, which we encourage people to do. You can not just maintain them, but if you find that they're not working, you replace the BMP. You find a different best management practice. And there are consultants that will help you figure out the best management practices for your site and develop the SWIP for you. The two people in our Idaho office in Boise that are much more knowledgeable about this subject than I am are Maria Lopez and Bill Stewart. They're also inspectors, but they will provide some compliance assistance by phone, put you in touch with the right websites and the right people to help you out. The other thing I wanted to mention is, and I think this might be helpful for some of the issues that you have here at Bear Lake that I see in driving around the lake. So far I've only been on the west shore, I haven't been over to the east side, but something that's been talked about quite a bit in probably the last 5 to 10 years is low impact development, LID. And the concept is pretty simple, and it gets after the fact that the more impervious surface that you have in your watershed, the more streets, the more building roofs, things that are going to shed water and shed it right onto the land and wash it down into your lake or stream, the more the impact on stream quality. So you'll see with And which is the pointer?
Yeah, top right.
So, top right? Oh well. Oh, there it is. So you have good water quality where you have less or no watershed impervious surface. You guys have not concreted over your entire watershed yet. Most cities have. Obviously, New York City, it's all concrete. Boise is getting a lot of concrete, has had a lot of concrete, and we've been running our stormwater right into the Boise River. And because of that, we're seeing the Boise River water quality decline. So cities and communities are working to design their projects, their developments, to have less impact on water quality. That's why it's called low impact development. Minimize pollution loading and runoff volumes by not creating as much impervious surface, concrete. You end up using small scale treatment systems. You don't have to pay for the larger scale systems. You're not generating as much water pollution or polluted water to process through your waste treatment systems. So you're going to save money, reduce infrastructure costs. You maximize infiltration into the groundwater, so you're recharging the groundwater. And you're protecting ecosystem functions and values, the functions and values that Amber mentioned this morning. How do you get there? Well, it takes local ordinances, and you're going to have to work with your local counties, your other entities of government to determine what ordinances you want to help developers understand how to develop the land with less impact to the lake and the streams flowing into that lake, and less impact to wetlands. Fire codes, street codes, building codes, parking requirements all specify curbs that are required. They specify width. A lot of those are just adding to the impervious surfaces. We're finding that a lot of fire departments don't like the low impact development plans because it means they can't turn their trucks around. Well, they're learning through painful negotiating that they can figure out a different way to turn their truck around, or there can be some pervious surface structures developed in areas where they can still turn their truck around. It's a temporary access, and I live on a street where they did that at the end of our block. Our block was turned into a cul-de-sac, and at the end they wanted to make sure they could get trucks onto our street from Curtis Road. So they put in these block concrete that they grow sod on, or grass seeds popped up through the concrete. Still provides some stability so you can drive on it. It doesn't look like a road. It looks like a lawn now. But if we should have a fire on our street, they don't have to go the long way to get to us. They can cut right across there and have that firm footing that the gentleman here mentioned for getting into some areas. You end up reducing storm piping. Again, the infrastructure cost drops. The curb and gutter thing I kind of mentioned. Building footprints. Some of it's about building up rather than out. So you have less roofing that is shedding water. And some places are the ordinances for one-story buildings, ranch homes or whatever. So that there's, again, is maybe a need for change in ordinance. Preserve sensitive soils. Soils that Amber mentioned act like sponges, wetland soils that will take up the sediment that runs off a parking lot and ends up in the wetland next to the parking lot. You could preserve that wetland instead of allowing somebody else to build on it. Develop ordinances to preserve wetlands around your town, to absorb the stormwater runoff, the runoff from pervious surfaces, and be a filter to your lake. Minimize grazing, etc. And here's just some quick examples. Green roofs, you've probably heard of those happening in some cities. Open swales, farmers have been using these for years. The NRCS has recommended open swales on farm ground to absorb some of the sediment coming off of farm ground. You can do those in town too. The parking lot infiltration, there's an example of almost like a wetland set up between the two parking areas. So runoff from the parking lot soaks into the ground in that middle, and it's nicely landscaped. Bioretention is another example of that. And here's what they used on Curtis Road, those permeable or porous pavement blocks. And again, we've got other contacts, other people that are more knowledgeable about this than I am. And if you'd like, I can certainly print these pages and get those contacts to you. So I'm really thankful to have an opportunity to mention this to you guys, and I think an LID approach for some of your communities that are developing around the lake might be something to consider. So it reduces sprawl and takes care of some of the heavy sediment loads that might be entering the lake, besides the Bear Lake or Bear River sediment load that's obviously way huger than anything I'm talking about here. But every little bit counts. So, and I think I'll leave the wetlands talk for tomorrow. The other thing I do in life is wetlands work. So.
Just a question. I appreciate the technical assistance and things that you folks provide. What assistance do you give the county to help them also prevent erosion and deal with sediment migration and so on that's a result of the county road that seems to divert a lot of water and funnel it into some unique areas that cause private ownership difficulties? What assistance do you give them?
Well, you know, we really don't. Yeah. Unless they're constructing the road. If it's being constructed, they should be using those same construction general permit requirements and best management practices. If it's, yeah. So, and if it's an acre they're disturbing, they need to be getting the permit and doing that. Regular road runoff is kind of like what I was talking about, the low impact development. People
provide any incentives to help them be interested in keeping their culverts open and some of those things. So,
as far as incentives, we try to use enforcement when it comes to like construction sites, or, and I'll mention tomorrow, we'll talk about wetland or enforcement on projects that are occurring in wetlands without permits.
But nothing existing.
Yeah, if it's existing, there are some road best management practices that we've given to the forest industry and forest roads because those are a huge problem. And those same best management practices can apply to counties. We haven't done a whole lot of outreach with counties. When they replace a culvert, they go through a permit process with the Corps of Engineers. Sometimes the state agencies are involved in that permit process. Idaho Department of Water Resources has a Stream Channel Protection Act. They'll require erosion prevention best management practices during the culvert replacement. So, but I appreciate what you're saying. It can be a huge problem on these dirt roads that have drainages.
They're in more of a position to deal with it when you know, they're tax dollars than I am as a private individual. It seems like they get a buy and I get an incentive.
Yeah, well, and you know, and we can all help educate each other. You know, they may not know, or you know, just
they're professionals.
Yeah, but they might not have attended a workshop either. And you know, some of these people learn from, you know, the guy that's been working there 20 years, and he or she doesn't know. But yeah. Okay, thank you.